What's up, everybody? It's your boy. My favorite piece of nerd lore in all of nerd history is that in Star Wars, wherein famously Mace Windu, played by Samuel L. Jackson, has a purple lightsaber, the only purple lightsaber in the entire Star Wars cinematic universe, that purple lightsaber exists for absolutely no other reason than the fact that Samuel L. Jackson wanted his character's lightsaber to be purple. There's no justification for it. There's no reason it's purple. It's just that he thought a purple one would look sick, and he was right, and that's the type of energy that I'm trying to be on for the rest of my entire life. AKA Reed from Shameless Nerd. Today's video is about Pee-Wee Herman, actually. If you end up liking this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. You can also join these beautiful people on the screen right here by clicking the join button to become a member of the channel, whereupon you will get exclusive access to some members-only videos, as well as access to every single video a few days early. You can also join the Shameless Nerd Discord at the link in the description, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. And you can always email me with any questions, comments, concerns, or recommendations for movies at reedfromshamelessnerd@gmail.com. All right, let's get into it. From 1986 until 1991, there was on CBS a quirky and strange mixed media children's show starring a slender man in a gray suit. And on this show, this extremely animated gray suit donning character would entertain guests at and residents of his weird clubhouse, such as Jambi, a bodiless genie in subtle drag makeup who would grant wishes in his native language of Jambese when chanted correctly. Terry, a puppeted pterodactyl who often acted like a petulant child. Cowboy Curtis, a black cowboy in pink and purple cowboy regalia who would often play songs and do crazy shit with his lasso. Conky 2000, an artificially intelligent robot who provides these guests and residents with a secret word each day that triggers an involuntary mandated dance party. And Cherry, a giant love seat who tickles anyone who dares to sit upon him, among many, many others which we will get to. The protagonist of the show oscillated between functioning as a sort of man-child at like a kindergarten show and tell for an invisible audience, and a fully coherent, albeit strange, functional adult who made decisions and learned important lessons. The show would also regularly jump to like showings of 1940s and 50s cartoons or claymation shorts about Penny, a girl with pennies for eyes, before returning to wacky hijinks like the titular character winning tickets to a Hawaiian luau and having to decide which of his friends to take with him, or being abducted by an alien named Zizzy Baluba, an episode that scarred me for life as a kid and set me back at least 3 years or so. This show, of course, was none other than Pee-wee's Playhouse, created, largely written, and directed by, and of course starring Paul Reubens as Pee-Wee Herman, featuring actors who would go on to become all-time greats such as Phil Hartman and Lawrence Fishburne. And in the late 80s, early 90s, there was almost nothing bigger than Pee-wee's Playhouse. This was also during the peak of VHS syndication, and so for much of the 90s, even post-cable reruns of the show, Pee-wee's Playhouse was a phenomenon. In fact, during its 5-year run on network television, Pee-wee's Playhouse averaged over 11 million weekly viewers. That is the average viewership. For context, given that we live in the streaming era and measure ratings on minutes watched, this is, for comparison, the list of the highest viewership for Nickelodeon shows of all time. You might notice that there are only 2 episodes of any show in the history of Nickelodeon which hit the 11 million mark. Here is the most viewed episode premieres in all of TV history ever, the highest of all time being only 3 times the average viewership of Pee-wee's Playhouse. Pee-wee's Playhouse was one of the most easily and instantly recognizable shows of its time, and Pee-wee Herman, the character, one of the most easily and instantly recognizable characters of all time. The show was nominated for 22 Emmys during its run and won 15. Paul Reubens won 2 Primetime Emmys, went on to win a Grammy for Best Audiobook, and Pee-wee Herman also received the ultimate honor, of course, of being impersonated by Eminem in one of the greatest rap songs of all time, Without Me. But as many of you probably know, there was, of course, some controversy regarding Paul Reubens in the 90s and early 2000s, and all kinds of stories were told about what this was and what this entailed, what it meant. And so, was Paul Reubens a bad guy? Was he misunderstood? And what made him and the Wacky Kids show so important and special in the first place? What is the truth about Pee-wee Herman? So, first of all, let's talk about the character Pee-wee Herman. Many people don't even know that Pee-wee Herman was a character at all, and this was deliberately so. Paul Reubens lived in the character for much of his career, inside and outside of the show. He publicly appeared on talk shows as Pee-wee Herman. He appeared in public as Pee-wee Herman. He introduced himself and played along as Pee-wee Herman to fans that met him for at least all throughout the 80s and 90s, and he essentially committed to the bit for most of his public life. He was Pee-wee Herman, and Pee-wee Herman was awesome. Paul Reubens believed in the validity of programming made for children audiences as important and real and valuable, and he took pride in that, and he took it seriously. In 2007, he said, "I was Pee-wee Herman for so many years that it wasn't really a question that I didn't want to do other things." And as regular viewers of the channel probably already know, I might be a little sentimental, but I think that this is a really cool and valiant thing to do as an actor creating a character, especially when that actor is for children. The wonder and amazement in TV and movies as a kid is believing in the illusion, not having to suspend your disbelief to enjoy Superman, but believing that Superman is literally real. And I think it's really cool that Paul Reubens believed in the sanctity of protecting that illusion for kids. I believe in long-term performance art. I believe in committing to the bit. And I don't know, I just think that that's cool, like on a foundational level. But what was really cool and special about Pee-Wee Herman, and especially Pee-wee's Playhouse, wasn't just committing to the bit or being tongue-in-cheek or earnest. Pee-Wee Herman, the character, developed for the stage and comedy shows which Reubens toured for years for adult audiences before developing the character for a more specific and younger demographic, was captivating and unique and weird and creative and honestly kind of a masterclass in silliness, which I think is a brand of humor that is so incredibly sorely missed these days that I think is so important. Conan O'Brien is a good example of the ways in which humor can be stupid and smart at the same time, genius in its silliness, that not every single funny movie and show we watch has to be a dramedy to be taken seriously, that not every joke has to have a punchline with political implications or that makes you reconsider held beliefs, that there is genius and value in play and silliness. This is something that I believe so adamantly, that part of this like misery epidemic in modern society is that we've insisted for years that adults should never be silly. If you want to laugh, you have to earn it. If you want to play, you've got to use cards and drink whiskey while you do it. And I just reject that. And I love silly humor. Andy Kaufman and Stephen Wright and Jonathan Winters, like those are my like comedy goats. And the adult version of Pee-Wee Herman is to me just as intriguing and genius. And honestly, absurdism and silliness isn't actually dead anyway. We still long for it and support it and love it. We've just forced it out of Hollywood and onto social media in the form of memes. We love silliness. Adults love silliness. We just pretend that we don't. Or we view it as like a lesser art form when we're subjected to it. And Pee-wee's Playhouse was the absolute peak of like silly creative genius. Like, I like to view myself as kind of like a left field creative and weird guy, and there is almost nothing in Pee-wee's Playhouse that I could come up with if I had 10 years to do it. Pee-wee's best friend is a pterodactyl. The Window, aptly named Mr. Window, announces visitors to the Playhouse. Pee-wee often goes into a photo booth to essentially FaceTime Captain Carl, a grizzled sea captain regularly calling Pee-wee in the middle of an ocean storm. In every episode, a taxi driver named Dixie shows up with a trumpet to announce the arrival of the king of cartoons, who presents a Betty Boop-style cell animation short on his projector. Pee-wee often jumps into an Etch-a-Sketch named Magic Screen to play Connect the Dots. He has a robot named Conky 2000 that gives him secret words, a 1950s style Cool Cats jazz band comprised of 3 puppeteered literal cats, a giant human hand named Knucklehead which appears in the window to tell knock-knock jokes. There's a reoccurring claymation short titled El Hombre, which is entirely in Spanish and it appears unsubtitled. And these are just like scratching the surface. I didn't even talk about Jambi and Zizzy Baluba yet. And the art style and aesthetic of Pee-wee's Playhouse is postmodernist and eclectic, mixed media, and exists outside of time altogether. It's this super cool blend of like old and new that allows the show to feel nostalgic and old, but has, in my opinion, allowed it to age much better than almost any of the live-action kids shows from the 80s and 90s. I mean, try watching Legends of the Hidden Temple now from Nickelodeon. It looks like that show cost like $50 to make. And perhaps most importantly, at least most importantly to me, Pee-wee's Playhouse did what I think a great kids show or movie must do and rarely does, which is capture a child's imagination in its purest form, and also refuse simultaneously to condescend to its audience. There is a difference between watching a genius kids show like the early seasons of SpongeBob and like sitting through the silliness because you get to catch the adult humor that goes over the heads of the kids, and that's still genius, but there's a difference between that and watching a genius kids show like Pee-wee's Playhouse and just being like, what in the hell is happening? Like being unable to relate to or even understand what you're watching because it's not for you, it's for kids. It's not representative of your brain anymore. You can't access that anymore, but still being captivated by it. Pee-wee's Playhouse is a fever dream, and you can absolutely watch it through that lens and just be like blown away by the lunacy of it all. But if you watch a kid watch it, like I get to watch my 4-year-old son watch, it can be that and the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. My 4-year-old son, who I raise almost entirely off screens altogether, but will occasionally let watch like some movies and TV, absolutely loses his mind for Pee-wee's Playhouse because it's what's going on in his head incarnate. Like he's satiated by, he enjoys great narrative kids entertainment like the Pixar films or shows like early SpongeBob or Fairly Odd Parents or whatever, but he is enraptured by Pee-wee's Playhouse because it captures the essence of what it means to still have access to your imagination. To be able to reach those like disparately insane creative choices that Paul Reubens made in like having a blue genie in a box grant wishes in a language he made up, for example, or having a minivan-sized foil ball he rolls out to celebratorily add to in each episode. And I think the show is really beautiful in this way. It's not trying to do anything except celebrate creativity and imagination and fun and silliness. It's not preachy, it's not didactic, it's not highbrow, and that's what makes it highbrow. I love Pee-wee's Playhouse. As an artistic endeavor, as a character, as a show, a defense of Pee-wee Herman and Pee-wee's Playhouse is to me like almost inarguable. It's one of the most iconic and influential characters of all time with a bullet. But criticism of Pee-wee Herman often targets the controversy of Paul Reubens' legal troubles in 1991 and 2001 as like the reason for dismissing Pee-wee Herman, or retroactively like forcing a viewing of it through a different lens and finding it like creepy or off-putting. And this is just as misguided and misunderstood as like dismissing Pee-wee's Playhouse for artistic reasons, if not more so. In 1991, Paul Reubens was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor indecent exposure charge. And in 2001, he pleaded not guilty to, again, a misdemeanor charge, this time for obscenity, sentenced to pay a $100 fine and enter counseling at his private discretion for 1 year. And I'll get into the details of both arrests and the charges in a second, but when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school in the mid-2000s, as far as I knew then, and as far as many people think now, Pee-wee Herman was like a freak, an evil pedo, did horrible things. That like crazy, like apocryphal removing a rib for self-fellatio story was attributed to him, and I was told over and over in rumors on the playground type shit that Pee-wee Herman was a bad guy. And what actually happened in 1991 seems at first to like kind of back that up. NBC distanced itself from Reubens, canceled airings of Pee-wee's Playhouse, and the industry all but blackballed him for years until he didn't really resurface until the 2001 arrest, which seemed even worse. Well, I am more than willing to defend these two arrests, and I think that early 2000s homophobia and the serial killer moral panic of the mid-80s into the 90s, and honestly like the memeability of Pee-wee Herman had way more to do with the fall of Paul Reubens than did any arrest or any actual goings-on. So first of all, in 1991, Paul Reubens was arrested for indecent exposure. This is a super ugly sounding charge, one that has a ton of moral outrage built into it. These are the creepiest creeps in our society. There is nothing more off-putting than those weird-ass weirdos who get off on exposing themselves to others, and I get it. But that's not what this was. In 1991, when this happened, before computers, before the internet, there were adult movie theaters that showed adult movies. You know what I'm talking about, right? And Paul Reubens was arrested for masturbating at one of these adult movie theaters in the dark by himself in a room that like, what are you supposed to be doing there? Like, what is the expectation? What is the point? Like, what? I mean, yes, by 2026 standards, this seems like weird behavior, but like, adult movie theaters existed for decades before people just had endless access to like adult content online for free. And again, what are you supposed to be doing in there? Just watching? Writing a review? But after this, because of the insane peak of popularity that Paul Reubens was experiencing like right before this time, and then to me, because of the cultural panic of the time about protecting children due to like the satanic panic of the 80s, the serial killer panic of the 80s, because of the raging homophobia during the AIDS epidemic of the 80s. This was like the worst time, cultural speaking, not like, you know, lynch-wise, but reputation-wise, in American history to be arrested for anything vaguely sexual and, God forbid, maybe a little bit gay. And even worse, because Pee-wee Herman's whole shtick was being a man-child, and because Paul Reubens, the person, was so inextricably linked with Pee-wee Herman, the character, it made it impossible for a lot of people to separate Paul Reubens from Pee-wee Herman. And the news jumped on it because it's a very incendiary and like, you know, scintillating story, made it into something that it wasn't, and it wasn't an actor being arrested for some minor charge. It was the character from the beloved show being arrested for some major sexual deviance. And that's just not fair. Like, that's stupid to me. We as Americans have such a massive Puritan bullshit issue. The fact that everyone at the time and for years afterward pretended that they didn't do the exact same thing is insane. It wasn't exhibitionism. It wasn't Chris D'Elia or Louis C.K. behavior. It wasn't predatory. It was just like being lonely and being an adult. It's like when you get a speeding ticket next to the guy who was going the same speed as you. You weren't the bad guy Soy Jack and he the Giga Chad morally upstanding citizen. You just got unlucky. And Paul Reubens just got extremely unlucky in my opinion. But the other charge, the one that really sunk Paul Reubens, was literally just homophobia and misunderstanding. I will stand on this. I simply do not care. Paul Reubens was suspected of and then arrested for lewd images of children that he simply did not have. And then because of the hellscape of our justice system, he had to plead guilty to a much lesser charge just to get the hell out of court and try to put it all behind him because his career was over and he had nothing to gain from it. He literally did not have inappropriate, stuff. Reubens was a weird dude by some standards, and he collected vintage kind of like pin-up softcore erotica memorabilia, and while that's certainly not my cup of tea personally, I mean, I collect Pokemon plush toys and ceramic gnomes. Like, I sure hope that that's not a crime. LAPD got an undeserved warrant, in my opinion, to search Paul Reubens' house based on an anonymous tip from a former friend of Reubens who was mad at him during the peak of the witch hunt for this kind of stuff, like right after the actually legit Jeffrey Jones felony arrest. And again, in 2001, like 9/11 had just happened. This was the most Republican era since Abraham Lincoln. We needed God, boy. We need to find those gays and snuff them out. There was no more public, unabashed, anti-gay slant in American culture since like way before that. They were still dropping the F slur and Superbad in 2007. And in Reubens' house on this warrant, they seized 30,000 images of vintage, like kitsch or whatever it's called, material. And after processing all of it, they found 170 images that they arbitrarily decided were obscene or seemed to represent minors. Stuff like, for example, their words, a black and white tintype from 1901 with a young man of indeterminate age laying on the beach after having gone skinny dipping. 1901. You're telling me that at the dawn of the internet in 2001, the best that some creep in pursuit of inappropriate content featuring minors could do would be a black and white tintype image from 1901? And again, the charge officially given to Reubens after the initial arrest was dropped to a misdemeanor charge of obscenity, for which he paid $100 in fines and went to counseling for 1 year. And then it was expunged from his record altogether. It was like when you get arrested as like a 15-year-old and they leave it on your thing for a year and then they get rid of it. It was just a witch hunt. It was just a result of momentum, and unfortunately a result of what I think to be a defensible position by Reubens, which was a great tragedy, and him being like, well, my life is over anyway. The arrest was public. The story's public. It doesn't matter. I just want it to be over. And begrudgingly pleading guilty to the ultimately insignificant charge after the fact, paying his $100 to avoid paying thousands in a long drawn-out court case to avoid, again, a misdemeanor charge in the first place. This happens a lot, even if the charge is actually bad. In America, pleading guilty doesn't mean that you're guilty. It means that you're willing to accept a better deal than take the risk of going all the way through our horribly drawn-out and complicated court system and paying thousands and thousands of dollars in the process. You are so heavily incentivized to just plead guilty. And for Reubens, it just didn't matter. The damage was done. They don't come out after the fact in the news and be like, breaking news, we were wrong. Paul Reubens didn't actually do any of that stuff. We're sorry, more day. They just move on. Like, it was too late. And the last thing that I'll say on it is that I'm sure there are some people out there who are like, well, still, it's weird. He was creepy for doing that stuff. And while I disagree, I think that that's a little virtue signaling and kind of bullshit in my opinion, I can at least sympathize with the fact that if you are some like upstanding, perfect person and you're morally opposed to masturbation and nudity in any way, but even so, even if you think that that's weird, there is a massive difference between being weird and being a criminal. I've been talking to myself in a storage shed in my backyard for 30 minutes now. I'm not normal either. Being weird isn't a crime. And importantly, most importantly, people are complicated. People are dissonant. People have incongruent interests and aspects of their personality that don't overlap. Paul Reubens was irrevocably punished for being too Pee-Wee Herman for his own good. Him being an adult who had interests that don't align with being a fictional character that he made up didn't mean that there's anything insidious or malicious about him or the character. People should be allowed the freedom to do whatever they want as long as it's not harming someone else when they're not at work, and that has nothing to do with what they do at work. Like, I get frustrated by this all the time as a teacher. If a teacher were to post like a picture of herself like drinking and dancing on a boat somewhere over the summer on vacation or something, things that are perfectly legal and fun, that teacher could lose her job over it. I've seen stuff like that happen. What does what you do on the weekend have to do with what you do at your job? Just because Paul Reubens liked like old nude nude magazines or whatever doesn't mean that he shouldn't have been allowed to be Pee-Wee Herman anymore. Like, what are we talking about? And when you take into account that Paul Reubens died a closeted gay man who only came out posthumously in a documentary he had made toward the end of his life, as he struggled very privately with cancer, dying in a surprise to almost anyone, it makes it all a little bit sadder. He tried so hard to protect Pee-Wee Herman. He went to his grave unmarried, unwilling to come out publicly because of the criticism he knew the character and his legacy would face, especially given the controversy that already existed, and him feeling like he had to hide and repress being an adult human like all of us are because he had to hide his sexuality, I think is a part of all this, and I think that that should be factored into the conversation. But all in all, Paul Reubens was one of the most creative and unique minds in American TV history, with an eye for the future, helping to launch the careers of like Lawrence Fishburne and Phil Hartman, who platformed real artists in an era of like conglomerate corporate slop, who got NBC to greenlight the at the time most expensive kids program in TV history, one of the most innovative and interesting writers and performers of our time. I don't even know why I made this video. I just like Pee-Wee's Playhouse a lot. It means a lot to me. Like, that was the soundtrack of my childhood, like the foundation of so much of the creativity that is so important to me now as an adult. And then I spent so much of my life under the impression that he was a villain, and he just wasn't. And I don't hear enough people talking about that, I guess, although I don't know why people would be talking about Pee-Wee Herman. I don't know why I created a straw man argument just to get very passionately angry about making a video about Pee-Wee's Playhouse, but you know, that's kind of what you sign up for when you watch a Shameless Nerd video. Thanks for watching. See y'all next time. In today's post-video video, I am going to do something that I did a long time ago in a video that I haven't done in a while, which is I am going to ask that if you're still watching this, you take about a minute and a half and just do nothing. And don't click off this video, not for like retention rates, but just like, I mean, you can click off if you want to, but like if you're willing to just sit here for a minute in silence, and I'm going to sit here and we're just going to sit in silence and just like, I don't know. I just think it's good. I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's something that we do anymore. Like, you don't have to meditate. You don't have to think about anything in particular. We're just gonna sit in silence, okay? All right, here we go. Okay, bye.